Imagine celebrating a holiday with your family, surrounded by laughter and joy, only to have it shattered just days later, when someone you love disappears without a trace. This isn't the plot of a thriller. This is the chilling real-life story of Christine Holloway and her 14-month-old daughter Vanessa. A shocking discovery would later unravel a dark, haunting secret that no one saw coming. On December 2, 2019, Christine Holloway, a 43-year-old daycare worker, and her young daughter Vanessa Morales suddenly vanished from their home in Unveils, Connecticut. Just days earlier, the family had been celebrating Thanksgiving together, sharing meals and making memories. But by that Monday morning, their world would be forever changed. Christine, who was known for her dedication to children, was never one to miss work. She was reliable, loved by her co-workers and friends, and the heart of the daycare where she worked. But on that fateful morning, something wasn't right. The daycare owner, Rosie Clark, began to grow concerned when Christine, who was always punctual, failed to show up for her shift. A quick attempt to reach her by phone went unanswered, and when co-workers began calling around, they quickly realized something was off. By 1 p.m., the worry had intensified, and Rosie decided to call the police for a welfare check on Christine's apartment. The police arrived at her home on Myrtle Avenue, a second-floor apartment above a garage, and immediately noticed something strange. The street was cold, with temperatures hovering below freezing, yet both windows in Christine's apartment were wide open. Inside, the lights were still on, but the door was locked, and there was no sign of movement within. The officers attempted to make contact, knocking on the door, but there was no response. Suspicion began to mount. They noticed another odd detail. One of the windows appeared to have been left ajar, a strange decision given the freezing weather. With no answers, the officers were forced to break the door open and enter the apartment. What they found next would change everything. As the door crashed open, an eerie silence filled the apartment. The officers immediately noticed that the place seemed unnervingly clean. But it wasn't the neatness that shocked them. It was what they found in the bathroom. Christine's lifeless body was discovered in the bathtub, clearly deceased. The officers moved quickly, securing the scene and searching for Vanessa, but she was nowhere to be found. This discovery set off a frantic investigation. The tragic fate of Christine Holloway was clear, but what had happened to her daughter, Vanessa? Was she still alive? Was she in danger? The answers were elusive, and no one knew the depth of the darkness that would unfold. With the discovery of Christine's body, the investigation into her death and the disappearance of little Vanessa intensified. But what seemed like a tragic mystery quickly escalated into something far darker and more disturbing. As soon as Christine's body was found, local law enforcement quickly began to piece together the details of what had transpired. The chilling discovery left the entire community in shock, but what happened next only deepened the mystery. Christine's boyfriend, Jose Morales, was immediately contacted. He had been the last person to see Christine before she left for work that morning. However, his statements to the authorities seemed puzzling from the very beginning. He claimed he last saw Christine around 7 a.m. that day, just before she left with Vanessa for work. But when the officers dug a little deeper, his story didn't quite add up. Jose had initially told investigators that he saw Christine and Vanessa leave his mother's house Friday evening, the night before. But when questioned further, he changed his story. He now claimed that he had only spoken to Christine on the phone that morning, and that he hadn't actually seen her at all. Why the sudden change in his statement? It was the first of many inconsistencies that would raise suspicions about his involvement. The officers also discovered something strange about the vehicle that Christine drove. Jose claimed she was still driving her old 2002 Mazda Protege, but neighbors had reported seeing Christine driving a newer black Ford Focus. Jose seemed unaware of this car, despite the fact that Christine had recently traded in her old vehicle. This raised more red flags, especially considering that Jose had accompanied Christine when she selected the car at the dealership. Why didn't he remember this seemingly important detail? The questions continued to mount. Christine's family was understandably worried, especially about the fate of 14-month-old Vanessa. Christine's brother and sister-in-law were contacted, but they hadn't heard from her either. Everyone was desperate for answers, and they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Investigators also began canvassing the neighborhood, hoping someone might have seen or heard something. One neighbor reported seeing Jose leaving the apartment building earlier that day, but no one could provide any new information on the whereabouts of little Vanessa. Meanwhile, police returned to Christine's apartment to search for further clues. The apartment, although locked up and cold, showed signs of something more sinister than just a tragic accident. The scene was carefully processed, and it didn't take long for the forensic team to discover disturbing signs of blood and signs of a hasty cleanup. Could the crime scene reveal more than just Christine's tragic death? The investigators were about to find out. As the investigation continued to unfold, there was one question that everyone was asking: where was Vanessa? With no sign of the 1-year-old in the apartment, and Christine's tragic death confirmed, the search for the missing child became urgent. But no one knew just how dark the truth would become. As investigators scoured Christine's apartment, the mystery deepened. The scene inside seemed carefully curated, almost as if someone had tried to clean up and hide what had happened. Bloodstains, discolored rags, and signs of a disturbed environment suggested that the crime wasn't just a random act. It was methodical. But as tragic as Christine's death was, it was the disappearance of Vanessa that haunted everyone involved in the case. Where was the child? Had she been taken? Was she still alive? Officers from multiple departments, including the FBI and the Connecticut State Police, began a full-scale search for little Vanessa. They combed through nearby neighborhoods, looking for any trace of the toddler. They reached out to the public for help, desperate for any piece of information that might lead them to her. Time was running out. The longer Vanessa remained missing, the more likely it seemed that she was in serious danger. The investigation took a darker turn when police turned their attention back to Jose Morales. His behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious, and his answers to the authorities were inconsistent. The authorities began to focus on his strange lack of concern for his daughter's disappearance. When officers asked him about Vanessa's whereabouts, his responses were cold and emotionless, almost as if he wasn't the least bit worried about her safety. Meanwhile, investigators were piecing together surveillance footage from the surrounding area. Surveillance cameras from neighboring homes and businesses showed troubling footage. On the morning of December 2nd, a witness saw Jose leaving Christine's apartment carrying a car seat and a child's toy, presumably Vanessa's, but there was no sign of the baby in the footage. The unsettling sight of Jose leaving the scene, seemingly without his daughter, raised more questions than it answered. At the same time, police were receiving more unsettling reports. A local garbage bin had been found near Christine's apartment, overflowing with empty cans and discarded items. Among the refuse, investigators found a blood-stained towel that appeared to have been used for cleaning up. The connection between the items found in the bin and the crime scene was undeniable. This was no accident. Then came a truly chilling revelation. Just a few days after the crime, a local donation charity, Kiducation, had found bags of items covered in blood-like stains. These bags, dumped in a donation bin near a church, contained children's clothing, toys, and items belonging to Christine. Most disturbingly, they also found a single pink Croc shoe that matched one found at the crime scene. But the other shoe, the matching one, was still missing. It was becoming increasingly clear that Jose Morales was involved in something much darker than just a tragic incident. The search for Vanessa had now turned into a manhunt, and as more evidence mounted against Jose, the authorities feared that they were running out of time to bring the little girl home. With the search for Vanessa continuing, police zeroed in on Christine's boyfriend, Jose Morales. His strange behavior, inconsistent statements, and mounting evidence against him suggested he was not just a witness. He was the key to understanding what happened to Christine and her daughter. The truth about what transpired behind closed doors was about to come to light. As the investigation progressed, police began to scrutinize Jose Morales more closely. His story had changed multiple times, and every new detail seemed to deepen the suspicion surrounding him. Initially, Jose told police that he hadn't seen Christine since Friday night, after they spent Thanksgiving together at his mother's house. But when detectives examined his cell phone data, they discovered a different timeline, one that cast doubt on everything he had said. Surveillance footage also contradicted his version of events. Jose was captured on camera in the early hours of December 1st, just hours after the murder was believed to have occurred. The footage showed him leaving the apartment building, visibly carrying a large black contractor's bag. The bag, later examined, contained bloodstains, blood that would later be confirmed to belong to Christine. This discovery was a critical turning point in the case. It was clear now that Jose had been involved in not just the crime but in an extensive cover-up. In addition to the mounting physical evidence, Jose's demeanor raised alarms for investigators. During his interviews, he seemed strangely indifferent to the search for Vanessa. In fact, at one point, he even made a comment about how the whole thing was stressful, but that he had bigger problems to deal with. He didn't ask about his daughter, or seem particularly concerned about the search efforts. This lack of emotion for a missing child, especially when his girlfriend had been murdered, felt incredibly out of place. Things grew even more suspicious when police learned that Jose had tried to cover his tracks by wiping down his phone. Investigators soon discovered that Jose had been texting a number of different people, including his family, about the situation, yet the messages offered no real concern. He kept telling everyone that everything was fine, even as the police were closing in on him. One of the most telling moments was when he told his mother, "I'm not worried about it. It'll all be fine." The authorities also delved into Jose's past. He had a history of manipulative behavior, and Christine's friends and family described their relationship as volatile. While he had 2 children from a previous relationship, he lived with his mother and had a troubling history of anger issues. His relationship with Christine, they revealed, was marked by jealousy and control, with multiple accounts of emotional abuse. Could this toxic relationship have escalated to violence? Despite the evidence mounting against him, Jose continued to deny any involvement in Christine's death or Vanessa's disappearance. But his story didn't hold up under investigation. The physical evidence, combined with his inconsistent statements, painted a disturbing picture of a man willing to do anything to cover up his crimes. As police worked tirelessly to connect the dots, it became increasingly clear that Jose was hiding a terrible secret, one that would soon be revealed. As investigators continued to dig into Jose Morales' past and actions, they began uncovering more shocking revelations. But it wasn't just the disappearance of little Vanessa that haunted the case. It was the brutal, heartbreaking nature of Christine's death. The crime scene would reveal more about the violence she suffered than anyone could have imagined. The investigation took a dark turn when the autopsy report on Christine Holloway was completed. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of a missing person quickly evolved into something much more sinister. Christine had suffered brutal violence before her death. An autopsy revealed that she had been struck multiple times with a blunt object, likely a hammer, and the trauma she endured was unimaginable. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, no fewer than 8 blows to her head and upper body. The severity of the assault pointed to a crime of rage, not just a random attack. As police continued to analyze the crime scene, they found additional disturbing evidence that suggested Christine had been attacked and left to die near her daughter's crib. The violence was unthinkable, but the circumstances surrounding her death raised even more chilling questions. Christine's body was discovered in the bathtub, but forensic evidence indicated that she hadn't simply been killed there. It appeared that after the brutal assault, Christine's body had been moved post-mortem. Someone had undressed her and relocated her to the bathtub. Why would someone go to such lengths to disturb the crime scene and attempt to hide the extent of the brutality? But the most haunting detail of all was the presence of Christine's own DNA under her fingernails. It wasn't just a sign of her struggle, it was a desperate final act of trying to defend herself. The DNA also indicated that she had fought back against her attacker. Whoever killed her wasn't just a stranger, they were someone she knew, someone she trusted, and that person had turned on her with violent intent. As police reviewed the crime scene photos, they noticed that several items around Christine's crib had been stained with blood, items belonging to Vanessa. A rocking chair, stuffed animals, and even a set of children's toys showed signs of blood splatter. The scene was chaotic, unsettling, and filled with the remnants of a battle. Christine had tried to protect her daughter in those final moments, and there was more. Investigators also discovered a significant number of beer cans scattered around the apartment. The recycling bin on the porch was overflowing with empty cans, and the kitchen contained an unemptied bin with more alcohol-related trash. But the most troubling part, no alcohol was found in Christine's system. Christine wasn't a drinker. This raised the question, had someone tried to stage the scene to make it look like Christine was intoxicated? Was this part of a cover-up? The discovery of the blood-stained items, The blood on the walls, and the signs of a hasty cleanup only deepened the suspicion. Jose Morales was the prime suspect, but the full scope of his involvement in Christine's murder remained unclear. As more and more disturbing pieces of evidence were uncovered, it became harder to deny that this wasn't just an accidental death, it was a calculated act of violence. And the search for Vanessa had only just begun. As the investigation continued, a key piece of evidence emerged, a mysterious 911 call made from Jose Morales's phone. The call would not only raise further suspicions about his involvement, but it would also provide chilling insight into what might have transpired in the hours leading up to Christine's death. On December 1st, just hours before Christine's body was discovered, a 911 call was made from Jose Morales's phone. The call, which lasted just over a minute, was traced back to a cell tower near Myrtle Avenue, close to Christine's apartment. But when the dispatcher answered, the conversation was far from coherent. The voice on the call was slurred, and at first it was difficult for the operator to understand the person on the other end. The man, who was later identified as Jose, seemed to be struggling to speak. He was clearly intoxicated, though later authorities would speculate whether he was under the influence of alcohol or something stronger. In the background of the call, a woman's voice could be faintly heard. She sounded distressed, asking repeatedly, "Who are you calling?" Despite the slurred speech and confusion, the operator was able to catch one important detail. Jose mentioned the street name Myrtle Avenue, but before the operator could ask any further questions, the call abruptly disconnected. No further attempts to reconnect were successful. The bizarre nature of the call immediately caught the attention of investigators. Why was Jose making a 911 call at such a late hour, and why was it so garbled and disconnected? More importantly, who was the woman on the other end of the line, and why was she so upset? This call, coupled with the evidence from the crime scene, raised more questions than answers. Jose's story about not being involved was becoming increasingly difficult to believe. His incoherent 911 call only added to the suspicion surrounding his role in Christine's death. The timeline of events began to take shape. Christine had been killed sometime between Saturday night and early Sunday morning. Jose had told investigators that he was with his friend Hector during that time, but police soon discovered this story didn't match up with the evidence. Surveillance footage showed Jose's loud Nissan leaving Christine's apartment at odd hours on Saturday and Sunday. He had driven both his own car and Christine's new Ford Focus. The 911 call, with its strange muffled voices and disjointed nature, seemed to suggest that something had gone terribly wrong that night. The growing suspicion was undeniable. Jose had been involved in Christine's death. But what about Vanessa? Was she kidnapped? Or had something even more sinister occurred? As the days passed and more evidence was gathered, the authorities were increasingly convinced that Jose Morales was at the center of this horrific crime. But the most unsettling question remained: where was little Vanessa? What had happened to her in those final hours? The hunt for the one-year-old continued, and police were now more desperate than ever to find answers. The search for Vanessa Morales has stretched into years, but with every passing day, the question of her whereabouts grows more urgent. Meanwhile, the trial of Jose Morales begins, and the pieces of the puzzle finally start to fall into place. As the trial unfolds, the haunting question lingers: will we ever learn the fate of little Vanessa? The investigation and search for Vanessa had stretched on for years without any concrete answers. Despite the intense manhunt, no trace of the young girl was ever found. The authorities, however, remained hopeful that the breakthrough they needed would come. As time passed, Jose Morales was arrested and charged with Christine's murder. But the mystery of Vanessa's fate remained unresolved. Jose's trial began in 2025, and it was one of the most high-profile cases the region had seen in years. The courtroom was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and family members, all eager to hear the truth behind the horrific crime. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the damning evidence against Jose, beginning with the physical evidence from the crime scene, including the bloodstains, the black contractor's bag, and the 911 call. The evidence was overwhelming. Christine had been murdered in a brutal and violent attack. But as much as the prosecution had, they couldn't provide any information on Vanessa's whereabouts. The prosecution made it clear that Jose was the last person to see the child, but he had offered no information, and his behavior had been nothing short of bizarre throughout the investigation. He had lied repeatedly, and offered no real concern for his daughter's safety. Throughout the trial, Jose remained emotionless, despite the heavy charges against him. His defense team, however, tried to argue that Jose had been under the influence of drugs when the crime occurred. They claimed that his memory had been impaired due to PCP, a powerful hallucinogenic. Jose himself took the stand, telling the jury that he had been attacked by two unknown men who had murdered Christine and kidnapped Vanessa. According to Jose, he was unconscious for most of the attack, unable to remember anything clearly. His explanation, though dramatic, was met with skepticism. The prosecution countered by presenting the extensive evidence that pointed to a carefully planned crime, not a random act of violence. They argued that Jose's attempt to blame strangers was an effort to avoid responsibility for his actions. His stories of being incapacitated and hallucinating didn't hold up, especially when considering the logical actions he took after the crime, such as cleaning up the scene and discarding evidence. Throughout the trial, Christine's family remained steadfast, holding on to the hope that one day they would find Vanessa. The prosecution's case was strong, but the absence of Vanessa weighed heavily on everyone in the courtroom. Despite the mounting evidence, the search for Vanessa continued in parallel with the trial, with the FBI offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to her location. As the jury deliberated, the question remained, would Jose confess, or would the family finally get the closure they desperately needed? And would the truth about Vanessa ever come to light? The haunting case of Christine Holloway and Vanessa Morales had captured the nation's attention, but the story was far from over. As the trial continues, and the search for Vanessa persists, we ask you to help spread the word. If you have any information about Vanessa's whereabouts, or any new leads, please contact the authorities immediately. Every small detail could bring us one step closer to bringing justice to Christine and her daughter. Subscribe for more updates on this case, and join us as we continue to follow the haunting search for Vanessa Morales.